This is the first video for our discussion on nonspecific immunity, which is also called innate immunity. And our nonspecific immunity is also known as our first and second lines of defense. So when it comes to host defenses, which is essentially going to be our immune system, this is how we fight back against those virulence factors that we talked about that pathogens use to try to weaken the host, right? We don't want to become weakened and sick and immunocompromised, so we are going to fight back against those pathogens via our immune system. Now, there are two different types of immunity that we have, our innate immunity and our acquired immunity. And this next set of videos is going to talk about our innate immunity. And you'll see on this slide on the far left green box that the innate immune response is also called nonspecific immunity. And it's called nonspecific because these cells and processes that we're going to talk about are always ready, and they do not care what the pathogen is. It is the same immune response whether we're dealing with a bacterial pathogen, a viral pathogen, a protozoan pathogen. It doesn't matter what type of bacteria it is. If there's a foreign invader in our body, the exact same innate immune responses are going to happen. Okay, and we are born with these responses and these cells. So they are always present, always on the lookout for pathogens, and just very quickly activated if there's any detection of danger. What we'll get into next week is our acquired immunity, and these are like our antibodies, and they are specific for a specific pathogen. So we have antibodies specifically for E. coli, antibodies specifically for Shigella, antibodies specifically for Salmonella. And so anything that you've been exposed to in your lifetime, you've got antibodies for it. And so as you're exposed to more and more things, you continue to develop your acquired or specific immunity. Okay, so this video is going to talk mainly about the first line of defense, and then there will be a series of several videos where we go into our second line of defense. But both first and second lines of defense make up our innate or non-specific immunity. Okay, and there are going to be a few more second line of defense processes that we're going to talk about that are listed on here, but the picture is already getting a little crowded. So there will be a few more processes that we'll be talking about for our innate immunity. All right, so let's zoom in on our first lines of defense. And these are going to be ways that we try to keep pathogens out. Okay, this doesn't involve trying to find and eliminate pathogens. This is essentially trying to keep the door closed so they can't even get in. Okay, and so we can divide our first line of defenses into four categories: structures that just kind of make the body impervious or very hard to get into; chemicals or molecules that we find in things like sweat, saliva, bile, tears, things like that, kind of the liquids of the body. What chemicals and molecules are in there that help prevent pathogens from successfully invading the body. Mechanical, these are movements that we do that are going to help flush out any, or mainly flush out and prevent things from really getting in and colonizing the body. And then this last one is actually interesting. Some researchers like to debate whether or not our normal microbiota should be included as a first line of defense, but they are always within our body, and they are trying to, prevent pathogen takeovers. So I'm going to go ahead and include it, give them their kudos for helping us out. So I want you to take a look, though, real quick at the examples here, and we're going to talk about these a little bit more here in just a minute. But look at mechanical, okay? So urination, right, defecation, those are going to be flushing out kind of the exit parts of our body for our digestive system. Salivation, right, in our mouth, and vomiting, right? Look how, but these are movements that happen within the body that are designed to help keep, again, organisms from colonizing. So blinking could be another one. So just trying to point out that this list isn't exactly exhaustive. And some people tend to get confused, some of the mechanical with structures, because it takes parts of our body to make us vomit, right? But we're not worried about the structures involved in that process. We're just more worried about the physical movement itself. Okay, so let's get into more detail, but I'm not going to talk in great depth. A lot of people have had anatomy and physiology, and so they're already familiar with some of these physical and chemical barriers. And because this is a micro class, I'm going to focus more on our second line of defense for the exams and quizzes and things. So I am going to go through this pretty quick because I just want you to have a basic understanding of how these structures and chemicals and things keep microbes out most of the time. So when it comes to physical barriers, the skin is really our biggest weapon because, right, the epidermis is composed of stratified squamous epithelium. And so essentially what that means is there are many layers, right? And they're tightly packed, and the junctions between the cells are very tight. And so taken together, it's very hard for pathogens to get through our epidermis. The outermost epidermal layer actually sloughs off, and so that is going to be reducing the bacterial numbers on a regular basis as well. There's also the presence of keratinocytes, and those produce keratin, which is a waterproofing protein, and it makes skin dry and very inhospitable to pathogens. Okay, and then we also have sweat glands, but I'm going to talk more about that with the mechanical. So for now, though, there's just a lot of qualities associated with skin as a structure that keeps pathogens out. So then we have mucous membranes. And so these are non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium found like in the mouth, the upper esophagus, the vagina, the anal canal, and similar to skin, but it's unkeratinized. There are many layers and tight junctions between cells. So again, it makes it difficult for pathogens to invade deeper tissues. And notice I tried to eliminate some of the extra text that was originally on this slide, for those of you that printed it earlier, to try to get rid of those mechanical movements and chemical properties. All right. When it comes to the respiratory tract, some of the cells that we have contain cilia, which are those little hair-like projections that have a very wavy motion. And so what happens is we also have what are called goblet cells, and these cells produce mucus. And so these ciliated cells will move kind of like an escalator, and they push things like mucus, which can trap pathogens, out. Okay, so it is the structure of these ciliated cells and their natural properties that help prevent things from staying within our respiratory tract. All right, and then there is going to be protection for the genito-urinary tract, but this is mainly going to be getting into kind of the mechanical movements and chemical properties, right? Vaginal secretions, for instance, are going to cleanse out the lower reproductive tract. So there's like there's a physical, right? Because there's skin and stuff in that area, but we're kind of transitioning into more of the chemical properties that are in secretions that are make the vagina, for instance, an inhospitable environment. Same thing with urination as well. But again, that's more of a mechanical movement. okay, trying to flush out these systems, because you have to think about the nature of these systems and where they're at and how things get in and out of each of these systems. Whereas, things like our arms, for instance, right? Skin is going to be the main way things can get in. That's going to be different than our gastrointestinal tract and our respiratory tract. So there are going to be different first lines of defense associated with each of these, just based on the nature of this system we're talking about. All right, so now that we've kind of started getting into like secretions and things, let's talk a little bit more about chemical defenses. So sebaceous secretions are going to have a lot of antimicrobial effects. So like the sebum on our hands has a lot of fatty acids, which is going to impede microbial growth a lot. Kind of big picture with skin, right? We have perspiration and sebum. Okay, like I just said, the sebum has the fatty acids, but perspiration has lysozyme, which is an enzyme that breaks down the cell wall of microbes, bacteria specifically, breaks down the cell wall of bacteria, right? It's also a salty environment, right? Most organisms are not halophiles or even haloduric, so the presence of salty sweat on our skin makes it a very inhospitable environment. And then there's also lactotransferrin, and lactotransferrin is an iron sequestering molecule. And so pathogens need iron to live. And so by having lactotransferrin, which is kind of hoarding all of that iron, means that there's not enough nutrients to grow. So go ahead and add lactotransferrin to your list, please. When it comes to saliva, saliva also contains lysozyme and lactotransferrin, and tears do as well. Okay, so a lot of the secretions in the body, and these are just a couple of them, are going to have those key chemicals that are going to prevent, especially microbial growth or bacterial growth. All right, continuing on. So a little bit of a deeper talk here on mechanical defenses. So mechanical defenses mean movement. So that is going to be some sort of forceful expulsion or flushing of our systems. But it can also be things like blinking, where you're preventing microbes from even getting into your eye to begin with. And so as body fluids, right, are moved through our system, hopefully out of our system, right, we're dislodging those microbes and eliminating them from the body. Okay, and so you see a nice list here that was on the previous slide. But new to that list is coughing and sneezing, right? Have you ever noticed when you're kind of choking, right, you'll kind of cough, right, because you're trying to move things up and out of your airway. So while that doesn't necessarily have to do with, that doesn't have anything to do with pathogens, it's still trying to explain why coughing is kind of that natural reaction. You're trying to dislodge something, okay? So coughing and sneezing are also forms of mechanical defense. And then we have our normal microbiota. So we've talked about how these organisms aid in digestion and things like that. But when it comes to helping keep pathogens away, our normal microbiota is really important because they do something called microbial antagonism. So an antagonistic relationship is one where one of the organisms is harmed. Okay, and so in this case, our normal microbiota is trying to harm a pathogen or prevent them from surviving within the body. And so they do this in a variety of ways, depending on which part of the body we're talking about. Some of our normal microbiota physically block access to pathogens, so that way they can't gain access to the body. They also are responsible for helping maintaining the environment of certain areas. So for instance, our vaginal microbiota, the pH is pretty low compared to other parts of the body. And that's partially because of a type of bacteria that inhabits that area. And so a lot of pathogens that get in or that could potentially get into that area aren't going to be able to survive because of that low pH that is maintained by part of our normal microbiota. Okay, but also for other parts of the body in our normal microbiota, they're competing for space and for nutrients and things like that. So there's just not a lot available to pathogens right off the bat because of our normal microbiota. But some species within our normal microbiota actually produce and release antimicrobials that are harmful for organisms that aren't normally found in that area. So release little molecules that the other normal microbiota species are resistant to, but organisms that aren't a part of the microbiota, aka pathogens, if they get in, they can't survive these antimicrobial molecules. And so that's a form of microbial antagonism because the microbes are trying to harm other foreign microbial pathogens. All right, y'all. So that is going to be where we stop this video. The next video is going to talk more about our second line of defense. Please let me know if you have any questions.